We are in Champions League, man.
That was my next
Dilly din,
question.
dilly dong, come on.
Encara Messi, 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 gol, 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 gol.
Into Sheringham, and Solskjaer has won it!
I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
This is the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast with Gary Curneen.
Hello, welcome to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. My name is Gary Curneen. Joining me for this episode is David Tenney. He is the High Performance Director for the Orlando Magic in the NBA and the former High Performance Director with the Seattle Sounders in the MLS for 9 seasons there. He has done a lot in the soccer coaching community, and we talk about his views on certain aspects of the game, MLS combines, subjective, objective, staff dynamics, and what soccer environments can learn from the NBA. Some great insight there. So, as always, would love to hear your thoughts at Gary Curneen on Twitter, at Gary Curneen on Instagram. Check out Techne Futbol, the training app for individual players, teams and clubs. Players can train on their own when and where they want, while coaches can track their progress. Download the Techne Futbol app for a free trial or go to technefutbol.com and you can use the promo code MSC2019 for 10% off. Here's David. Enjoy. David, thanks so much for joining me this morning on the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. Really excited to have you on.
It's a pleasure.
So this podcast, we're going to focus on science in soccer and just trying to bridge the gap for coaches like me. In my opinion, you use social media really well. You challenge coaches to go a little bit further and deeper with their thinking, but at the same time, you talk to everyone with a great level of patience and respect. So I wanted to pick a few hot topics on social media and get your thoughts on it and try and help coaches like myself understand them a little bit more.
Okay.
Not to throw a grenade at you, but
Uh-oh.
just easy one to start with. Subjective versus objective, with the debate and obviously Raymond Verheyen putting his thoughts across a while ago. What's your thoughts on subjective thinking having almost zero place in the game?
I think the first thing when I think about subjective thinking a lot is I have, I think about intuitive feel. To me, that's kind of the subjectivity of what I'm looking at, what I think I'm looking at, and I almost feel like there's a nature where it's some level where the coach interacts with the game or the players, like there is a subjective intuitive feel. Right? If I watch my team play during the week, or I watch my athletes play during the week, and I might get some objective markers from where they are. And that could be technical, that could be physical, whatever that is. And then I have to create a session for them. So it's hard for me to think that, kind of that subjective view, that intuitive view of what might be next, that often comes from kind of experiential learning. To me, there's got to be some validity around that, right? Like, that would seem to make sense, because we can look at what's happening objectively in the game, but ultimately it comes down to the decisions we have to make to help those athletes over the week. And I feel like there's got to be a subjective view. Something popped up on my Facebook a couple weeks ago that a quote from Einstein that I had forgotten that I put it up there, and it was about Einstein's quote about intuition versus rationalism, and I thought it was fascinating, because I feel like I feel like, yes, I the objective, and yeah, but I think we can never throw away the intuitive piece, right? So Albert Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." And I love that quote, because I think it's so so valid, and it's even here in the NBA, I see that with sometimes with the therapists that we put around our athletes. We try to be very, very research based and very scientific, and everything we do is kind of backed by evidence. Having said that, there are some of the very, very best therapists in the world put their hands on these athletes and they have an intuitive feel what those athletes need, and that's a very real thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of the viewpoint I bring to that.
Yeah, like for me, I would consider myself very much an intuitive coach, and then but obviously I want to improve, and if there's a school of thinking that that's wrong, I want to look deeper into it. But I feel that it harms the coaching community if you're promoting a message that intuition has little or no value, because a lot of the best experiences, the things that I've learned from, come through failure. And I guess just the way we're programmed. So if we remove the ability to want to try things and fail, then surely we're setting up young coaches for failure in the long term by thinking they're going along a path that is not going to bring success or even enjoyment.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Next one, injury prevention. This is one for myself where I really struggle to understand it. That sports science, obviously it's not new, but do you think it's now being branded, or do you think it's being packaged as injury prevention too much in soccer with the technology and the load management?
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think it's kind of normal. I mean, I think that maybe it goes back to the subjective, objective side. Once you can actually objectively view what's really happening in the games, once you can objectively view how much athletes are running, sprinting, different kind of intense periods of workload. Sometimes you try to manage them when maybe you didn't try to manage those things. You didn't have that information. So the objectivity sometimes can kind of get in the way of your decision-making process. I think what's the saying is there's always kind of a overreaction in the near term and an underreaction in the long term. And are we in this period where we're reacting to some of the data that we're collecting, or we're over concerned? And that's what it goes back to. You brought Tony Strudwick. Some of the talks he's done, he has the talk on kind of high performance at his time in Manchester United, which I absolutely love. And he kind of talks about how do we use these tools to really push these athletes to be better and to be more resilient. And I think that's when kind of sports science and injury prevention is utilized the best. And how do we prepare these guys for the most intense moments of the game, and also prepare our athletes for where the sport is going, because the sport is continuing to dynamic and be more intense, and more games and less rest, and can't just do less. There have to be moments when they do more to create some kind of resiliency. And if you look at having players adapt to chronically high loads is the most protective of injury. Now how you get to that chronic high load, I think that's where the magic happens. I guess that's where the trick is, moving your athletes to a space where they can all tolerate chronically high loads. And I think that's probably your best form.
Just on that, I read an interview that you did. This was a few years ago when you were with Seattle, and you were talking about how 2 games a week, which we as coaches are just programmed to complain about match schedules, but you were saying that it actually helped the players.
Yeah. I mean, I think I always found if you get a group that's pretty resilient and you actually have 3 rest days between, they can do that for most players that can. Then you've worked in the zone where they can tolerate chronic loads, and you have 3 days rest. That's very, very manageable, I think. Now there will always be a couple athletes that may respond, and to me that's where it goes back to the sports science is looking within those games and who is kind of out of their normal variability at times in terms of workload, and then you can kind of make some adjustments from there if you need to rotate, if you've got to change your lineups or change what you do. I do find that if you can get athletes through these periods where they have these 2 games a week, then you will build in like a natural injury resilience in them.
Just finishing up on injury prevention, when we're talking about load, like load per se is not the only factor in play whenever an athlete gets injured. I'm correct there, yeah. So
yeah,
so
for sure.
what other factors are in play, and how can we get more awareness for it, and why don't we talk as much about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the world, most relevance for me now, the world we live in, the NBA, is the young athletes, and you have young athletes that come in, and it may still be a load issue, but the actuality is that they might not be strong enough yet. They might not be physically developed enough yet to meet the most intense demands. They might be underpowered, and as they fatigue, they lose their stability, and losing their stability, then they're more likely to have ankle or knee injury. And so it, in some ways it is load, but I think it's a bigger picture. It's taking a young kid who might not be strong enough, fit enough, move well enough, and then kind of put the right things in place over a 1, 2, or 3 year period where they get to where they need to be. And so then I think it's whatever practitioner it might be, whether it's a coach or strength coach or therapist or whatever. It's about having a system in place around the athletes that can view that athlete as, are they strong enough? Do they move well enough? Do they have previous injuries? The biggest indicator of injury is previous injury. So, really knowing what your athletes have been through before they get to you is really critical. And then spending some time thinking about, if they were injured before, why potentially did they get injured before? And, kind of put the right things in place around them. But then always understanding that it's always a long-term process. You might have to kind of guide through a year that they're going to have a higher injury risk. What you put in place over 2 months, 4 months, 6 months to try to get them to be stronger, move better, be more conditioned.
This might be a stupid question, but when you look at the teams, and when you put on the TV today and you see Chelsea and you see Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool, and the tempo of the game, how much risk is there in their world of dealing with sports science and results and tactics? Because it's a word that we rarely use, I feel, and because of that, again, awareness kind of drops. Like when you're in charge of those big clubs and you're in charge of a league that you want to play at a certain intensity, is there a massive risk week to week?
I mean, obviously, I'm not over there, but yeah, I'm sure there is. I think the issue that you have in those leagues is the pressure to win right now, right? So you are more likely to take risks, and when it goes around coaching jobs as well, you're less likely to tell a coach you can't have a guy because he might get injured. If if you have a game that's really critical to the club, to the coach's career, and to the player as well. I mean, what I find in those instances, I mean, again, coming back to my experience in the NBA, is that um, the more money that the athletes are making, um, the more cautious though they want to be. So as commissioners, we're kind of towing the line between knowing that the athletes don't necessarily want to risk injury because they're on these large wages, and they're kind of almost a brand unto themselves. The coach is under pressure because if they don't win, then they're obviously in that environment. Clubs will pull the trigger on making moves there faster than they did 10 years ago. And then you're collecting data and seeing this game get faster, more intense, and then you kind of got to make a decision. Everyone's kind of best interest at stake, and then trying to put forward what you think the best decision might be. Again, like, it's just not as easy as just purely, subjective versus objective. There's such a complex system that goes around. Like, what does this athlete think? What in my role, I get to know most of these athletes' agents. What does the agent think? What does the coach think? What does management think? What's the pressure on the coach? Where's the team at? And then trying to take kind of that complex system and make the right decision for each individual athlete, each individual day. So.
All right, couple of good ones for you now. Physical testing at the MLS Combine every January. Yep. There's a good Twitter storm about it, and
yep.
I really liked your insight on it this past time. Can you expand on your response to people that saying, like, why are you testing, running, jumping?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, inevitably there's a stream of tweets post MLS Combine every year of how useless combine testing is, and it's typical American, and all American cares about is athleticism. And the reality is that most of the tests these guys are all doing, if they were in a under 18 or 19 European club, they would be doing the same testing. They'd be doing a 30-meter sprint test, they'd be doing some jumping, they're doing some lateral agility testing. It's very normal testing. having been in the MLS setting, I don't really think the clubs overweight the value of testing results. You know, having sat through numerous discussions around draft picks, I mean, I can say that they may have a factor at times. That may be looking at, hey, we want to get a backup wing back. We're looking at these two guys. Which one might be faster or better athlete? And just having that context around athleticism when you're kind of looking at, kind of some depth player that you might get out of the draft, which I think is very normal, and I think it's useful. Inevitably, it also goes back to, Xavi didn't have to be faster, and Iniesta didn't have to be fast, and this is what's wrong with America. It's nothing that they don't do in the youth academies in Europe, and I think it gives teams a little bit of contextual information. Let's be honest, most of the players that come out of the draft are all squad players, depth players. So it just gives a little bit of context as they're kind of trying to make comparisons over who might have a little bit more athleticism, but it is not, kind of this is how Americans view the game that I think it gets painted on social media.
Yeah, Twitter not exactly designed for context.
No.
But even that there, like, you also along those lines, you jumped in about people tweeting about the Bielsa clip with everyone's all the Leeds players, and I do that myself. I think that's great. And the week before it, I would have thought it was great about the Pirlo or a Raquelme quote.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's exactly right. Is that the same people that I found were killing, that MLS was doing a physical testing combine protocol, were also the ones that were raving about the, kind of that feat of, okay, there is a mental side, this mental, but also physical intensity workload that Bielsa's Leeds team showed as they were in defensive transition. I mean, those guys looked fast and explosive, and they all ran back, and, it was a great feat of athleticism you saw in that film. And, and everyone kind of jumped at what a great coach Bielsa was. And, there's also really athletic guys running back at the same time. Yeah, so, and then, that same group, that both of those were also the ones tweeting about how Raquelme could not care less about wearing a GPS on his back, and nor should he, and that's what's wrong with the game. And, I said, I think I saw Raquelme play 4 times live for Boca, and he probably ran the least of, Riquelme and Palermo in those days. Boca probably ran the least of any 2 players that I've ever seen in any professional game ever. But they didn't need to. However, they had 7 players who played behind them who ran like frickin' dogs to cover for them. And I think that's the part I think sometimes missing. Yeah, you can have 1 or 2 players in your team that you may have the role where they don't actually have to run that much in the modern game. But someone has to run, and so in defensive transition, if 2 guys are not going to carry the workload, well, then that just means you have to have players behind them that can cover those workloads. And and that Boca team was amazing, because Palacios, Palermo up top, and then Riquelme behind, and then you had 7 guys that work as hard as any group of 7 guys I've ever seen in that Boca team. So again, like, it's nice to I totally understand what Riquelme's viewpoint was in that, but again, it goes back to context. Yeah, yes, that player had such good technique and such good vision and opened up the game so easily, and he didn't have to run. And he's probably right. He didn't need to wear GPS, because it really didn't make any. It would not have mattered if you evaluated his game on a game-to-game basis. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true, and I don't think any coach would disagree with you on social media, but the way social media works, it's almost an impossible platform to get that context through. The way we present information, absorb, consume it, was there any inspiration behind that frustration with, starting the Seattle Science Conference and just exposing people to more?
For sure. The Seattle Conference also started because being out on the West Coast and getting to know some of the West Coast college coaches and strength coaches, within about a week span, I had a pretty big men's program out on the West Coast. Their strength coach reaches out to me and says, hey, I really like the stuff you're doing. Can I can I come and talk to you? My coaching staff, like the soccer coaches, they're kind of clueless. Like they just don't get it. Like I'm in the off season. I got these guys finally now, and I can finally work on speed, work on power, work on athleticism. And all they do, the coaches complain, is that they can't do any sessions because I'm making them sore. And like they just don't get, I have to work on speed and power in this time of the year because I'm not going to be able to do any other year. And then literally like 5 days later, the head coach of the team calls me and says, yeah, can we come up and meet with you and talk to you and just see how you're doing things? Because we have this strength coach, he just doesn't get it. Like he's lifting these guys and they can't move. We have to adjust all of our training sessions, and like how he sees what guys should be doing in the off season and how we see it are just totally different. And both sides weren't really seeing what the other side was seeing. So I kind of thought, I should have an event where we just have both these groups in the same room at the same time. And let's just talk about it. And it became more of like a sports science driven thing. And, and obviously since then the environment has changed, and it's, I think you're having more people, we'd say in the athletic performance side, that understand the sport, that are more sports science driven than you did maybe when that event started like 8-9 years ago. So it's come a long ways, but it's, I think that was kind of the genesis of it, is I think it's embracing the idea that this is a very interdisciplinary rather than multidisciplinary. It's a very interdisciplinary arena that we live in. And if we can embrace people that understand sports science, people that understand strength and conditioning, people understand coaching methodology, people that understand skill acquisition, if we can bring them all in the same room, we can do a lot of good stuff and learn from each other. And the problem is, most people go to these symposiums where they surround themselves with like-minded people, and that just reinforces, kind of all those opinions we were talking about on Twitter. Like that just reinforces those.
Yeah, that communication piece is obviously, it's massive for an S&C coach. Credibility. I was talking to Megan Young about this yesterday.
Yep.
She was saying how much you've inspired her as a non-soccer player to get through and break into the soccer industry. And with your career in soccer, it was a little bit easier. How challenging is it with basketball?
It is a challenge, and I think you just have to know. I think the most important part is just to understand and know what you don't know. I think, and acknowledge what you don't know. What I try to engage in the staff here about is, do we have a methodology? How do we view skill acquisition? How are athletes fatiguing? Who's not able to tolerate the load of the season? And obviously once it comes to the basketball side here, like that's not my place, which is, and obviously that's very different because I kind of came to MLS as a prior soccer coach moving into this space, in sports science, strength conditioning, performance management. So I've been overseas and seen all the top teams in the world train overseas, and had some coaching education from Europe, and so yeah, there was some credibility with them that I had. And so to me, it's just kind of like learning how to stay in your lane and acknowledge what you know and what you don't know, and also constantly strive to learn the game better as well. And I think that's a process into itself, because again, it doesn't matter what sport it is, whether it's football, soccer, whether it's basketball. It's what teams are doing now is different than it was 3 years ago. So you kind of have to stay on top of how teams are working and training, and especially at the highest level, it's changing so fast. What NBA teams are doing is changing so fast. What Premier League teams doing is changing as well. So it's up to us to kind of stay on top of that, acknowledge what you know and acknowledge what you don't know.
I find it fascinating that the guys that are coming in, like the amount of information, the knowledge, like we're as coaches, we're somewhat blinded by intelligence, where we're like, wow, this could make me, but the intelligence gets you the job, but then after 2 weeks, the communication is going to make or break whether it's successful or not, right?
Yeah, and I think what's happening at the same time is that across the board, it doesn't matter what sport, the staffs are getting bigger as well. That's so you have more interactions, you have more relationships, there's more places things can go wrong, and my particular role right now in Orlando with the NBA is having, we essentially have head coach, president, GM, 4 assistant coaches, 4 young video assistant coaches, 10 performance medical staff people. And it's just, how do you facilitate information and make decisions and inform what's going on and kind of guide or inform the coach so the coach can guide, this process. That is the tricky part. And I think that's also not what people are trained in as well. That, a lot of this is kind of organizational leadership, organizational development, organizational culture.
We'll take a quick break there. Coaches, if you want your players to have the best, most fun and effective training tool available at their fingertips, now you can train on your own or motivate your players to with the Techne Futbol app. Created by Yael Averbuch, professional and experienced national team player, Techne Futbol is used throughout the US and in over 45 countries. Players are guided through individual technical sessions with written and video instruction. They can track their progress and compete with others on leaderboards, while coaches can monitor their players and encourage them to do so. Download the Techne Futbol app for a free trial. Go to technefutbol.com, where podcast listeners can get 10% off using the promo code MSC 2019. So definitely recommend coaches check that out. Back to Dave.
I went to one of our sponsors when I got up here a few weeks ago. Did an event, with a big corporation. They bring in a guest speaker, and the guest speaker was this big astrology person. And I thought, I sat for the whole thing, and obviously it was way over some of my head. But I spent more time thinking about why a corporation, a business, is bringing in an astrologist. But I've sussed it out after about 45 minutes. The CEO was trying to expose people to just different form of information, or learning outside your own sphere of where you work. And I thought it was absolute genius. And should we be doing more of that as coaches? Should I be going to more S&C events? Because I had someone on here a while ago and I asked a similar question, and he was pretty adamant on, no, stay where you are. The science must adapt to you. But what's your thoughts on that? How much more can I help myself and my team by being a bit more open-minded?
Yeah, I don't know if I see both points. I mean, what I would say is, to me, one of the biggest issues in coaching today is groupthink. I would say that if you look at, I think MIT did some work. MIT did some work on what they would call cognitive diversity, right? So they looked at teams and higher performing teams in different industries, and what they found was that the most cognitively diverse groups of people became the best problem solvers. And then when I go back and I look at how teams put together coaching staffs in different clubs, or if you look at, it's when you go and you look kind of on strength coaches, how strength coaches will hire assistants that are kind of just like them and see the world just like them. I think it is beneficial, like you're saying, to educate yourself in different topics, but I think it's even more important, if you have the ability to manage your own staff, is to really bring in people with really diverse skill sets and views of the world. And again, if we go back and I always reference kind of Tony Stridwick's time at Manchester United, and I think if you really look at Tony Stridwick, for me, having been able to go and view all the different clubs in different periods of time, I still reference Sir Alex Ferguson, Mick Phelan, Rennie Millenstein, Tony Stridwick, Manchester United, the early 2010 periods, right? And it was, if you look at it, it was a very cognitively diverse staff, because the way Sir Alex Ferguson saw everything, and Tony Stridwick and Rennie Millenstein and Mick Phelan, they're very diverse. And I think, again, going back to the intuitive side, Sir Alex Ferguson had this way of replacing that first team coach every, 3-4 years, to bring in new ideas, to have someone that saw things a little bit differently. I don't know if he consciously did that or how conscious that was, but I think he had this intuitive feel for needing this cognitive diversity in his staff, versus today some of the teams where like literally the same coaching staff goes from team to team to team to team. And I would have to think that it's really hard to battle this kind of groupthink that can creep in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought of this before, but when I went to the Mourinho presentation a few years back, and it was he presented with 5 of his staff, and these staff went everywhere with him. It was and I'm, now obviously with hindsight and not knowing the information, it's easy to make assumptions, but could that have prevented him from selling certain ideas to players? Maybe.
Very potentially. I mean, because I think the athletes change as well. I mean, the athletes today, especially with the millennial, the Gen X, Gen Y, or sorry, the Gen Y and the Gen Z generations, I think every staff is challenged a little bit differently from year to year. And so, again, if you don't have a cognitively diverse group that can actually change to how your players are changing, because if we look at, Mourinho is a good example. If we look at his the John Terry Chelsea versus the Paul Pogba Manchester United, like that is a vastly different group of athletes to deal with from a generational standpoint. And trying the same staff, using the same, and obviously I'm not in there. I don't know if they're using the same ideas or training ideas or ideas to reach the athletes, but I know 100%, having been in MLS and the NBA, what worked 10 years ago with athletes, that doesn't work today. Right? Because the players think differently, are connect to the world differently, view their peers differently, run different sized contracts, have more at stake financially than ever. Like that affects how you interact with them on a daily basis.
It's interesting for staff then, when you're hiring your staff, how many people look at, am I going to get along with this person because we're going to spend so much time together? But in reality, we might be better looking at the opposite and thinking, am I going to have some good arguments with this person?
Yeah. And is this person going to challenge me? Is this person going to tell me they think I might be wrong? Is this person going to be transparent with me? Is this person going to hold me accountable? And then you do have to guide to make sure it's all of these things are done in the right way. But again, like you do, I think transparency and accountability is kind of the 2 most important features of how staffs interact with each other and how staffs interact with athletes, and that sometimes is the hardest thing to keep within a staff.
All right, last couple for you. I wanted to get your thoughts on this decision making in basketball, and it's something that we are, as soccer coaches, and I'm sure you're very much aware, we're complaining about the fact that we're not producing decision makers. So again, there's an argument of overcoaching and allowing them more freedom in training sessions. But I view basketball as their ability to make those decisions is a seriously high level in college as well as pro. But when I look at basketball coaching, it's very much what we're saying is the wrong form of coaching today. Is what's your thoughts on that?
I think that's been to me. You talk about staying in your lane or knowing what your limitations are. For me, I tried to do the first 2 years of the NBA. It's just kind of watch the way coaching happens, and how much it's a very, very highly structured. Having said that, there's also kind of like tremendous player freedom. This balance of it appears structured, and again, like I will say, is like it is some of the most intensive, most structured coaching that I've seen in the NBA that I've ever seen before. And it's unbelievably impressive how teams defend the NBA, and how you deal with pick and rolls, and kind of it's how this flow between man and zone when you're switching players, when you stay with players, and it's so highly structured. How you deal with kind of picking and screens, and the team agreeing beforehand whether they're going to switch or not switch, and it's and you're talking about more on the offensive side of the ball with the offensive play. And I will say, like, I'm still trying to get. I am by no means any sort of an expert. I'm still trying to get the terminology that happens a lot is you have a 24-second shot clock, and essentially things are very highly structured for potentially the first 6 to 8 seconds of a shot clock, and then once you have some fairly defined movements between players. If you don't get the shot that you want, then you move what you call into like flow, what our coaches call flow, at which point you just have to read the situation and react off the situation. And it's like anything else where the more the players play together, and it's funny where like I've seen, with our coach of he will always try to keep that first rotation of players together and the second rotation of players together for as many minutes as he possibly can. Because you do have to train daily those interaction guys just over and over and over, and reading when someone's cutting off their marker to the basket. And I'm kind of switching between like basketball and soccer terminology, but when you cut to the basket, how you free yourself from your defender. Meanwhile, have this whole pressure of a shot clock that you have to get a shot off in a certain amount of time. So there's times late in the shot clock where it's just pure improvisation and trying to get an open shot. But I almost think it flows from a very like highly structured offense in the beginning to something that's more pure improvisation at the end. And I can say is that, again, where our guys come from, and in our practice setting, the practice setting is more on continuing to refine these more highly structured areas. And then when they are with their individual coach, then you're looking at more kind of that late in the shot clock kind of improvisations.
One of the things that about 10 years ago, I used to live close to Charlotte, so I used to go to a few Bobcats, Hornets games, and I used to sit really close to the floor, not because I was big time, but because nobody went to the games.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing I noticed was that there was no talking on the court, so everybody knew almost. That's what you're saying. They knew teammates' movements. They almost instinctively knew where to go and when.
Yeah. And essentially what happens today is that in any given time, you might have 3 players that are trying to move off of each other, one player with the ball, and then kind of 2 cutters, and then you've got 2 other guys that set up for a kind of open 3-point, a catch and shoot, kind of 3-point shot. And basically someone will improvise, and if they draw defenders, you always know that there's kind of open catch and shooters, which is why 3-point shooting has gone up so much as well. So there is a lot of spacing, even relative to soccer. Spacing is critical because the court's so small, so actually maximizing the space with these large guys and being able to get open shots is so critical. So it's been a really interesting process seeing that. And again, like I'm still a beginner and looking at it, but it gives you a lot of insight into kind of how you viewed coaching methodology prior to kind of coming to a different sport.
With player power being what it is today, obviously the player power in these US sports is real because of their contracts, and how much individual conversations are there. But because there is such a big staff, is the head coach more of a facilitator like American football, or is the head coach more, does he run training, does he do the individual meetings, is it like a college coach? Like what kind of insight can you give us there?
I think it's one of the things that I would almost take with me if I went back into football, soccer, is that the support that's around these players, and essentially what we have our head coach, like I said, I think four assistants plus a shooting coach, and then 4 young video guys that are essentially young assistant coaches in their 20s. At the beginning of the year, every player is assigned to a pair of assistant coach, video coach. They stay with them the whole year. Every practice, that tandem works with the 3 to 4 players assigned to them for 20 minutes. So if we have a practice that starts at 10:30, the first the first guys on the floor at 8:50 to do a 20-minute technical session. And then they just, each coach works with 3 or 4 players for 20 minutes leading up to practice. Some of them might go after practice, and then the head coach runs pretty much 2/3 of the normal practice, and that just gives so much individual time to those 3 to 4 guys, where they, each group, and it's all the positional groups, so each center has an assistant coach that played professionally for 14 years, that young video coach that may also have played in that position. And then prior to games, it's the same thing, but it's a little bit shorter. So then prior to the games, we start about 2 hours before the games. These guys do 15-minute technical sessions as an early part of their warm-up. And so you really get this whole head coach really working on the offensive and defensive schemes, and kind of teaching that, drilling that in during the practice sessions or walkthroughs. And then you get the assistant coach, video coach, and in a tandem working with these individuals in 15 or 20-minute segments, really working on the technical aspect of the game, which is really, really an intriguing way to do it.
Just thinking there, one of the things that frustrated me when I was a college coach was going in the morning, and every morning seeing, you have to walk through the basketball gym, and you see 3 different players in there every day, and you leave the office, and again, those players are probably still in there. And as not to go down a road of opposed and unopposed training dialogue, but with that there, is there something that, going into a different world, do you look at soccer and think we're not getting enough out of our players individually?
I mean, I will say that opposed versus unopposed technical training side of things, I mean, that's, I think what I've learned actually is that it goes back to our athletes, and I do think there might be athletes that might benefit greatly from unopposed technical training. And I've seen it. I mean, and I've asked our coaching staff at times, and our coaching staff will say, "Oh, if we can get one whole summer of unopposed 3-point shooting with our young guys, they'll go from a 31% 3-point shooter to a 37% 3-point shooter." And they believe, very strongly in that, and they've seen players improve greatly with kind of unopposed skills training like that. So I think it's kind of helped me view the opposed versus unopposed skills training kind of a little bit different lens, because there is essentially, I mean, the game of basketball is about shooting. If you can't shoot, then you can't really play in the NBA today. So I think it's still about, and I think there is a flow, like there is some things. One of the reasons why you have this young video assistant kind of with, paired with these guys during these shooting sessions is because you do go from a unopposed to kind of more opposed type setting as the session goes on, and then I think it's up to the assistant coaches to build exercises that become more game like, more pressured as these kind of little 20-minute sessions go on.
But in that transition period between the young players coming into the league, or even players who maybe are development or at the back end of the roster, it's got to be vitally important for those players just to be getting attention from any coach, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the strengths of the system, is that if even if you're not playing, you're getting 20 minutes of one-on-one attention, working the craft of your skills on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So and then you're going in and you're getting a conditioning and strength session with the strength staff as well. So no matter who you are, and again, it goes back to the athletes that may not be, maybe more what you call the back end of the roster. They're still obviously making a very good wage, and they still deserve a lot of attention because they are elite athletes in the NBA. So it's still up to us as coaches and performance staffs to give them a lot of attention to help them develop.
And then last one for you. So if again, just thinking there, you've got there's a lot of basketball in those environments that really, really intrigues me. There's the coaching relationship. There's the sports science, kind of the embrace that they've had in recent years. I went to a thing last year in San Francisco that was data analytics, and the stuff that they're doing in NBA is just miles ahead of soccer.
Yeah.
If you had to bring in a group of coaches tomorrow, or even recommend things for them to be studying and take from the NBA at this stage that basketball are ahead of us, where would you point them?
Yeah, I would say the level of individualization that we can give the players. I mean, there's even little things like we actually have for away games, we have 3 buses that go to the game, because the first athlete is on the court doing his pregame session 2 hours and 15 minutes before the game, and the last guy goes on 40 minutes before the game. So, kind of buses take athletes in like groups of 4 to 5 to the arena, so that everyone gets kind of what they need, and everyone stays in their rhythm. So I think it's a system that understands that athletes have a real rhythm that you have to kind of honor, and they need the coaching that you have to honor. I think they do a great job of figuring out kind of what all 15 guys need to help them operate at a high level daily. And that means individual coaching, individual support, individual nutrition, individual kind of strength programming, and it's highly individualized on a daily basis. From an analytics standpoint, I think how they're starting to view the game in terms of, shooting, whether, a guy is 2 feet away from you, 4 feet away from you, 6 feet away from you when you take the shot, with the positional data, what they can do. And that's definitely coming in football as well. The positional data side is taken off, but, we can actually see, judge, and also I think provide feedback to the players. It's very accepted to the players that, when you hold the ball more than 2 seconds, your shooting percentage drops from this to this. When you shoot when someone's within 3 feet of you, your shooting percentage drops from this to this. And that's feedback that can be provided to the players, that the players then take on as well. So there's a natural acceptance to some of the the analysis provided to them. And I think all the coaches, there's never a point with the coaching staff where they look at kind of data, analytics around the game and say, well, you guys don't really understand the game. That's not how it actually went. Which you see, obviously oftentimes in football. So I think because it is this kind of tight interaction of players on the court, the positional analysis, positional data does really help you see what guys are doing when they're under pressure, and how, and what really defines pressure, and how successful are they shooting, under pressure versus guys that need far less pressure to be successful shooters. And I think that's we really, really have good kind of evidence of how people perform in different kind of states of pressure. So
Brilliant. Dave, thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much to Dave for his time and his insight there. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As I said at the beginning, I have so much respect for Dave for not only his work, but also how he communicates online and the message he continually promotes. He's always patient with people, even if they have opposing views, and he actually educates in a very respectful way on social media, and it's very, very difficult to do that, and does a lot of good stuff in the coaching community. What stood out to me there was his point on groupthink and cognitive diversity, and obviously it's easy to see that David's quite open-minded and aware and working at the top level of the NBA and the MLS for so long. You have to have that type of skill set, an unbelievable skill set when it comes to adaptability and awareness and being flexible and being open-minded. But his advice to coaches on how we can do it, 2 things that jumped out to me there. Organising our staffs, looking beyond similarities when we're connecting with coaches, and then how we're actually consuming information online, which is a very, very, very important part of our everyday lives as coaches. what we're looking at, how we're receiving it. And again, just looking beyond our beliefs and looking beyond what we think is great and questioning it and being open to taking criticism on board or being open to people who view the game a different way. And I think that's the starting point for a coach. It's not just enough to say, you know, I'm open to new ideas. Yeah, I'll go to an NBA camp, or I'll go to an NFL or NHL or whatever it is, and I'll see what they do. Yeah, always open to do different things. You know, so many people say that, but so few actually are. So instead, I would ask if we're open enough in our everyday lives and those things like how we view our staff, how we talk to our staffs. Are we open in our everyday lives? Are we really maximising time with our players? Are we doing everything possible to improve the structures and the processes and questioning our organisation at all times, questioning our communication? And I think the reality is that there's always the possibility of doing more and there's always the possibility of getting better, but we've got to be aggressive in doing so, and we've also got to be humble enough to look for it. And we don't have to go and take a trip to the other side of the world, and we don't have to go and complain that we can't get into Real Madrid or Barcelona or Orlando Magic or whatever team it is. I think that there's so many solutions. You can look at businesses, you can look at podcasts. There's 100 ways to improve your organisation, the structures, the flow of communication. And we should be doing it. We should be doing it. So I took a lot from that there. I took a lot of inspiration, a lot of motivation to ask myself some questions after that there. So really, really enjoyed it and would love to hear your thoughts. At Gary Curneen on Twitter, at Gary Curneen on Instagram. Always appreciate you listening to the podcast. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Soccer Coach Podcast. For more coaching topics, sessions, and resources, head on over to Coach Curneen on Facebook or visit the website at www.modernsoccercoach.com.